when you look at a massive modern skyscraper, there's this expectation of permanence.
Right, yeah.
You look at the steel, the reinforced concrete, the sheer scale of it, and you just sort of trust the architecture. You certainly don't expect that, like, tapping on a single load-bearing wall could make the entire structure groan and sway. But, I mean, if you pull at the threads of the unfolding 2026 conflict between the United States and Iran, that towering geopolitical skyscraper starts looking like a really fragile house of cards.
It really does.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into a huge stack of urgent military assessments, geographical data, historical precedents, and heavy legal analyses.
There's a lot to cover.
Yeah, there is. And our mission today is to figure out how this specific conflict is, well, quietly dismantling the global order as we know it. We want to help you understand the true scale of the war, the paradoxes driving it, and obviously the global implications.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the inciting incident from our sources. It was April 7, 2026. The U.S. president posted a statement on social media directed squarely at Iran's 90 million people.
Yeah.
And it read, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again."
And, we should probably note right up front that the analyses we're looking at today contain some incredibly polarizing material.
Oh, absolutely.
Our job here isn't to, play judge and jury on who is right or wrong politically. We're just here to unpack the brutal math, the legal frameworks, and the military strategy that's actually driving the conflict.
Just following the sources.
Exactly. We're going to examine not just the military strikes themselves, but why a statement like that fundamentally challenges the post-World War II international order, the logic of nuclear non-proliferation, and, honestly, the very concept of the American way of war.
So let's look at the immediate shock of that threat, right, and its legal weight on the global stage. According to a really deep analysis from the Harvard Kennedy School, this wasn't just political hyperbole.
Or just a leader blowing off steam online. They actually categorized the statement using this concept from the philosopher J.L. Austin. It's called a performative utterance.
Yeah, that's a crucial concept here.
The idea is that the statement wasn't describing a future fact. The Speech Act itself functioned as a weapon. It was designed to terrorize civilians, which they point out is a direct violation of Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Conventions.
Well, and the sources draw a very direct and, frankly, sobering comparison to the Nuremberg trials after World War II.
Okay, how so?
So during those tribunals, Julius Streicher was convicted and sentenced to death, but not because he personally ordered soldiers to commit physical violence.
Right, he was a publisher, wasn't he?
Exactly. He was convicted because he weaponized his platform. He used his words as an instrument of atrocity. And Nuremberg established this legal precedent that words directed at the destruction of a people carry immense criminal weight.
So the language of civilizational destruction isn't just like a byproduct of a war crime. It is the mechanism of it. When a leader broadcasts that a civilization will die, the psychological terror inflicted on millions of civilians is the intended military effect.
Which brings us to this incredible paradox in the statement itself.
Right.
Because the post ends with the phrase, "God bless the great people of Iran."
Yeah, that part is...
It's wild. You threaten an entire civilization with absolute extinction, and in the very same breath, you bless them. It sounds like a complete psychological disconnect.
It does, but the Harvard analysis calls this the grammar of atrocity.
The grammar of atrocity.
Right. Because if you look back through history, those who carry out the destruction of a society, they rarely frame themselves as villains.
Oh, sure. They think they're the good guys.
Exactly. They almost universally frame themselves as liberators. The sources pull from colonial archives and even the architects of apartheid who constantly relied on this language of benevolent intent.
Like it's for their own good.
Yeah, they spoke of painful but necessary transformation while simultaneously dismantling whole communities. So the language of blessing and the language of erasure are historical companions.
I see.
Perpetrators need to narrate their destruction as liberation to justify the horror to themselves, to their soldiers, and obviously to their domestic populations.
It's less like a burglar announcing a heist on a megaphone and more like a demolition crew convincing themselves that bulldozing your house is the only way to save the neighborhood.
That's a really good way to put it.
But wait, if legal commentators at Harvard are calling this the clearest case of declared genocidal intent in modern history, Why is there absolutely no accountability? I mean, we have an international legal system for a reason, right?
Well, that brings us to a structural concept that the historian Michael Ignatieff coined. He calls it American exemptionalism.
Exemptionalism, okay.
Yeah. After World War II, the United States spent decades acting as the primary architect of the international legal order. But while building it, the U.S. intentionally exempted itself from the binding force of those very rules.
Like what, specifically?
For example, the U.S. is not a party to the Rome Statute. That's the international treaty that established the International Criminal Court at The Hague.
Wait, the U.S. isn't in the ICC.
No, not only are they not a member, but the U.S. has actively sanctioned ICC officials in the past for even attempting to investigate American personnel.
Oh, wow.
And you combine that with recent domestic U.S. court rulings granting broad presidential immunity for official acts, and you have this accumulated architecture that ensures the rules cannot be turned against the rule maker.
Meaning the whole concept of universal human rights isn't actually universal at all.
Right.
It only applies to the nations that don't have the military or economic power to just ignore it.
Exactly. And the legal scholar Thomas Frank developed this idea of the compliance ball.
What is that?
So international law isn't like domestic law, right? There's no global police force going around to arrest a superpower. Instead, it relies on a culture of internal constraint. Think about a U.S. military strike cell. When a commander points to a target on a map, a military lawyer, a JAG, is literally sitting in the room to evaluate proportionality and distinction. The JAG says, "Sir, you can't hit that. It's a hospital."
Right, checking the rules of engagement.
Exactly. That is the compliance pull in action. But the sources note that this internal culture of constraint has been deliberately dismantled in recent years. Senior military lawyers who push back have been replaced or sidelined.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, when the system can document the most damning evidence of intent imaginable, but the internal constraints are removed and the external courts are basically defanged, the moral weight of the international rules is rendered entirely hollow.
Okay, but it's one thing for international lawyers in The Hague to debate the legality of a statement. It's entirely different when 90 million people wake up, read that post, and genuinely believe their civilization is ending today.
Absolutely.
So how does that psychological shockwave change Iran's military strategy? Because looking at the sources, trying to stop a nuclear threat might have just mathematically guaranteed it.
Yeah, this is the core strategic paradox. So before this conflict escalated, Iran was operating as what experts call a threshold state.
Meaning they could build a bomb but haven't.
Exactly. They possess the advanced knowledge of uranium enrichment, the centrifuges, the technical infrastructure, but they maintained a strategic ambiguity. They stopped just short of assembling an actual nuclear warhead.
Right.
And this status gave them leverage. It made their enemies cautious, but avoided the ultimate consequences of crossing the red line.
And that's what the Obama-era nuclear agreement was built on, right?
Yes, that agreement leaned into this threshold status, successfully limiting their enrichment levels while allowing civilian nuclear activity subject to really intense inspections.
Okay.
But when the U.S. eventually abandoned that agreement, reapplied crushing sanctions, and ultimately escalated to military attacks and civilizational threats, Iran's strategic calculus just completely collapsed.
Because they realized that playing by the rules gave them all the economic punishment of being a nuclear power, but absolutely none of the physical protection of actually having a bomb.
You nailed it. And the sources point to 3 specific historical precedents that basically dictate this brutal math for Tehran.
Let's hear them.
Let's look at Ukraine first. In 1994, under the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine agreed to surrender its inherited Soviet nuclear arsenal.
Which is huge, right?
Massive. And in exchange, they received written security assurances from global powers, including Russia and the U.S., that their borders would be respected.
Right.
But trusting paper over physics proved catastrophic when Russia later invaded and annexed their territory.
Yeah, that's a dark lesson. And then there's Libya, which the sources say has to be the most visceral warning for Tehran.
Oh, definitely. In 2003, Muammar Gaddafi engaged in intense diplomacy with the West. He agreed to completely dismantle his weapons of mass destruction programs to get out from under crippling sanctions and, rejoin the global economy.
Right. He surrendered his stockpile.
He surrendered 55,000 pounds of nuclear and ballistic missile equipment, literally packing it into crates and shipping it to Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Wait, really? Oak Ridge?
Yeah. He gave up his mustard gas stockpiles, too. But the economic integration he expected never really materialized. He grew isolated and disillusioned.
And we know how that ended.
Right. In 2011, when a domestic uprising began, a NATO-backed military intervention enforced a no-fly zone, bombed his convoys, and led directly to his overthrow and brutal death in the streets.
Man. And then, on the complete flip side of the ledger, you have North Korea,
Exactly.
a hermit kingdom that successfully built the bomb, tested it, and despite total economic isolation, starvation, and international outrage, they remain completely untouched. Like, nobody is launching a regime change invasion into Pyongyang.
No, they aren't.
So what does this all mean? Are we basically teaching the globe that trust is not a warhead? That if you disarm, you get invaded? But if you build the bomb, your enemies suddenly get very cautious?
Sadly, yes. The overarching lesson the sources draw is that existential threats defeat coercive diplomacy.
Okay, explain that.
So coercive diplomacy works on a basic transaction, right? Change your behavior and the pain stops. We lift the sanctions.
Right, a carrot and a stick.
But an existential threat, a statement that your civilization will die, shatters that transaction. It tells the target, submit, and we might destroy you anyway.
Wow, yeah.
When a civilization's survival is on the line, surrendering your best deterrent is no longer the road to safety. Fierce, absolute resistance is. The military strikes and the rhetoric have likely guaranteed an absolute Iranian determination to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Even if they can't build it right now under heavy bombardment.
Exactly. They may not have the technical success to build one immediately, but the political and psychological decision to acquire one is now virtually irreversible.
Which begs the next obvious question. If Iran is now unequivocally determined to build a bomb, why doesn't the U.S. military just march in, take the ground, and physically stop them? Similar to what the coalition did in Iraq in 2003.
Well, the geography of Iran makes a conventional ground invasion a logistical nightmare on a scale that honestly defies modern American military experience.
Really?
Yeah, according to analyses from the Modern War Institute, Iran isn't just a country, it is a natural planetary fortress.
Here's where it gets really interesting looking at the maps and the source material, because the sheer scale is staggering. Iran is nearly 4 times the size of Iraq.
Huge.
The sources say you could take France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal, stitch all of their borders together, and Iran is still bigger.
It's massive, and it's not just the vast area you have to cross, it's the topography you have to conquer to get there.
Okay, walk me through it.
Let's walk through the mechanics of an invasion. If the U.S. military tries to push in from the west, they immediately slam into the Zagros Mountains.
Which is what exactly?
It's not a gentle ridgeline. It is a 1,000-mile jagged wall of solid stone. And modern military doctrine relies on mobility, right? Sweeping armored columns.
Sure, tanks, Humvees.
But you cannot drive a 70-ton M1 Abrams tank over sheer rock.
Right, so they are forced into the valleys.
Exactly. Which act as deadly natural choke points. Imagine a massive, mile-long invading convoy funneled into a narrow mountain pass where they can't turn around and they can't deploy side by side.
Oh, that's a sitting duck situation.
A small, well-hidden Iranian squad with shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles sitting on a ridge can disable the lead vehicle and the rear vehicle, trapping the entire armored column in a kill box.
Okay, so you bypass the west. What if you come from the north?
To the north, you face the Alborz Mountains. These feature 18,000-foot peaks.
18,000 feet.
Yeah. And at that altitude, you run into the physics of thin air. The U.S. military relies heavily on vertical envelopment. That's the tactical doctrine of using helicopters to drop troops, artillery, and supplies from the sky directly into combat zones.
Right, air cavalry.
But in the Alborz Mountains, the air is so thin that helicopter rotors literally cannot bite into the atmosphere to generate lift.
Really?
Their payload capacity drops to near zero, which effectively breaks the U.S. military's reliance on close air support.
Okay, well, what about a naval invasion from the south? The U.S. Navy is unparalleled.
It is, but the Persian coast offers almost no flat, sandy beaches for an amphibious landing like Normandy. It's heavily defined by sheer cliffs.
There's cliffs.
Mostly, yeah. And Iran has spent decades hollowing out those cliffs. They've carved subterranean naval bases and anti-ship missile silos deep into the bedrock.
What?
They can roll a missile out, fire at a U.S. carrier group, and roll the launcher back into the mountain before a retaliatory strike can even acquire the target.
It's like trying to storm a medieval castle, but the moat is boiling at 159 degrees, and the mountain walls literally shoot back at you.
That is highly accurate.
And even if a military force somehow breached all those outer mountain walls, they step into the interior, which holds the Dashti Lut Desert.
Oh, the desert is brutal.
The sources point out that surface temperatures there have been recorded at 159 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about the thermal dynamics of that. That kind of heat literally melts the silicon inside sophisticated targeting computers.
It does.
It causes tank engines to overheat and stall out before they even see combat.
And Iran is acutely aware of its geography. They use it as a strategic weapon. This is why their most sensitive nuclear facilities, like Qum, are buried deep inside mountains and deliberately placed right next to major population and cultural centers.
So if you bomb it, you hit civilians.
Exactly. It forces any attacker to guarantee massive collateral damage to even attempt a strike. It creates a powerful moral and political deterrent. Because of this extreme human and physical geography, Iran's entire defensive strategy relies on attrition.
Just waiting us out.
Yeah, they don't have to win a conventional set-piece battle. They just have to bog the U.S. military down in the mountains and the desert, stretching American supply lines until they break.
And supplying an army across an ocean into a 159-degree desert is a staggering feat, especially when you factor in current U.S. military vulnerabilities.
Right, the recruitment issues.
Yeah, the sources highlight a 12,000-person recruitment shortfall in the Army alone, alongside severely strained naval and special ops resources from other global deployments.
It's a huge problem.
You put all that together, and a ground invasion goes from being like a difficult policy choice to being functionally impossible.
Which means the U.S. has to rely on its historical playbook, which is projecting power from the air, utilizing its massive network of regional bases scattered across the Middle East.
Right.
But the sources reveal a shocking plot twist regarding this long-standing strategy of forward deployment. It has actually turned billions of dollars of American assets and our regional allies into sitting ducks.
Okay, let's get into this, because for decades, the U.S. deterrence model in the Persian Gulf has been built on a massive physical footprint.
Absolutely.
You have Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. You have the Navy's 5th Fleet headquartered in Bahrain, and major logistical hubs like Camp Buehring in Kuwait.
But the satellite imagery analyzed in our sources shows how fragile that footprint really is.
What's the show?
In less than 48 hours after the conflict escalated, at least 9 U.S. military positions were hit by Iranian drones and ballistic missiles.
9 positions.
Yeah, and they didn't just bomb runways. They specifically targeted satellite communication terminals.
Oh, to cut them off.
Exactly. Think about how a modern, digitized U.S. military base operates. It relies on data links to talk to the Pentagon, to coordinate with spy satellites, and to guide long-range interceptors.
Right, it's all networked.
By destroying those white SATCOM domes, Iran essentially blinded the bases. They severed them from the outside world and turned billion-dollar weapon systems into useless, isolated metal tubes that can't see over the horizon.
And the vulnerability bleeds far past the barbed wire of the military bases.
Creepy.
It extends directly to the civilian populations of our U.S. allies, specifically through water.
This is the scariest part.
The sources detail how the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC countries, face what hydrologists classify as absolute water scarcity. For context, severe water stress begins when a country drops below 1,700 cubic meters of renewable fresh water per person per year.
1,700.
Kuwait has just 4 cubic meters.
4. That is just astonishing.
Right. So to survive in that environment, the Gulf states rely almost entirely on 3,401 open-air desalination plants scattered across their coastlines. Qatar gets 99% of its drinking water from these facilities.
And the mechanics of a desalination plant make it incredibly fragile. They are what engineers call linear facilities.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the process of turning seawater into drinking water happens in a strict sequential chain. You pull the water through massive intake pipes, run it through pre-treatment filters, hit it with massive high-pressure pumps, and finally push it through delicate reverse osmosis polymer membranes.
It's an assembly line.
Yes, and if any single link in that chain is broken, the entire plant shuts down.
But wait, if they're that fragile and they provide 99% of the drinking water, how are they so exposed? I mean, we spend billions upon billions of dollars on advanced air defense systems like Patriot missile batteries.
We do.
How is it possible that our multi-billion-dollar defensive net is failing to protect something as basic as the drinking water of our allies from these strikes?
What's fascinating here is the brutal efficiency of asymmetric warfare.
Right.
Iran doesn't need to defeat a Patriot missile battery in a conventional high-altitude dogfight. They operate below the threshold of triggering a massive retaliation by using swarms of cheap, low-flying, expendable drones.
Oh, so they just fly under the radar.
Exactly. The radar systems on Patriot batteries are designed to look high in the sky for ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
They struggle to track a $20,000 drone flying 50 feet off the deck.
Wow.
And you don't even have to hit the desalination plant directly to cause a mechanical failure cascade.
What do you mean?
Desalination requires immense amounts of electricity to run those high-pressure pumps. If a drone strikes the local power grid substation 5 miles away, the electricity drops, the pumps stop, and the water stops flowing.
And there's also the threat to the ocean intake itself. Because the sources mentioned that back in 1991, Iraq purposely dumped millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf to clog Kuwaiti water intakes.
Yes, the fouled seawater tactic.
And the modern reverse osmosis plants they use today are even more vulnerable to that. If oil or debris gets sucked into the intake, it instantly shreds the delicate polymer membranes that actually filter the salt.
And this is where the strategic genius, however dark it may be, of Iran's asymmetric strategy comes into sharp focus.
Okay.
Most Gulf nations only have a few days of emergency water storage capacity.
A few days. That's it.
That's it. By implicitly threatening the power grids and the desalination plants, Iran creates immense political and existential pressure. Imagine the sheer panic of a population realizing their taps will run dry in 72 hours.
Oh, it would be absolute chaos.
Total chaos. And that domestic panic forces the governments of Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait to place immense diplomatic pressure on the United States to de-escalate the conflict immediately.
Or they just kick us out.
Exactly. Or worse, demand that the U.S. military pack up its bases and leave the region entirely to spare the host nations from destruction.
It is a profound realization. You might be tuning into this deep dive to catch up on the headlines of one specific regional conflict, but what all of these sources, the legal analyses, the geography, the military logistics, what they collectively show is a fundamental tectonic shift in global reality.
They really do.
The American way of war, this long-held idea that a superpower can rely on forward bases as untouchable sanctuaries, project conventional military might across the globe, and ignore the international legal structures without facing catastrophic asymmetric consequences. I mean, that era is rapidly coming to an end.
It is.
The foundation of that geopolitical skyscraper we talked about earlier isn't just groaning, it's actively cracking.
Which leaves us with a really profound and frankly unsettling question to consider moving forward.
What's that?
Well, if the United States model of global deterrence relied so heavily on the sheer intimidation of its conventional military superiority, and the moral weight of the international rules it originally helped build,
Yeah.
what happens tomorrow? What happens when other global powers, whether it's Russia, China, or emerging regional actors, watch this play out in real time? What happens when they realize that the architecture holding the world together, both the military sanctuaries and the legal restraints, has been rendered entirely hollow?
That is a chilling thought to leave on. The load-bearing walls of the international order might just be a mirage. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep pulling at the threads of these complex issues, and keep exploring the deeper connections on your own.